Greetings all. My name is Sanjiv Venkatram and welcome to another edition of User Delight with Microsoft Technology. And in this episode, we'll be talking about automating the process of standardized data exports from, as an example, SAP that come into your email as an attachment to finally getting the data in these Excels into Power BI, right? So we're going to automate this whole entire process, and let's head on over to Power Automate to see more. Thank you very much. All right, so let's walk through the entire solution first, and then we'll actually unpack it step by step, right? So essentially, you get an email. In this case, I'm sending an email to myself, but then the system would actually send you an email, let us say from SAP as an example, with a standard attachment, right? And the subject line basically says sales data. I mean, it could be anything, it could be machine data as an example, if you're a manufacturing entity. And this is an auto-generated file. Essentially, in SAP, you select a bunch of parameters, click a button, or schedule a report with certain fields. And these are standardized fields. As an example, if I were to open this Excel up really quickly, so this has country, product, and sales. So the columns are basically standardized is one thing. The rows could be, a few, many, doesn't matter, right? So that's one thing. So the columns are standardized based on the report that you've actually, based on the selections you've actually made in SAP, right? And this is the output that's actually generated. So that's one. The second thing basically is that there is no table in Excel, right? This is just raw data that has been spit out by your ERP and is emailed to you, right? So essentially the starting condition here is that an email has been sent to you with the attachment. So I'm going to do that. In this case, I'm going to simulate that. So I'm going to send myself an email. And the subject line basically says sales data, right? This is important because this is going to be a starting point in Power Automate for the flow. So I'm going to send myself an email. When I send that email, what happens is if I were to go online here, now Power Automate basically takes over, and I'm gonna go back here to Power Automate. I'm gonna turn off this new view. Actually, I'm gonna go back all the way to history here. So let us actually refresh this, and the flow should now run. See, it is running right now. Started 3 seconds ago, and we'll refresh it. It'll take a minute or so for this to actually run. So actually it took 15 seconds, right? And it succeeded. Now, what this does is that it goes away. And first of all, I'm going to move this thing down here. So what it does basically is if I were to refresh the SharePoint site here, it stores the Excel from the email to a SharePoint document library called incremental refresh. Now you could have your own library, but mine's incremental refresh, and it's actually stored it here, right? From here, what it does is it takes the Excel, it actually makes a table out of the data that you just saw, and from there it takes the table and incrementally creates a table within SharePoint. It incrementally adds these columns here, Canada, the US, India, and China, incrementally to the data that's already been here from prior reports. Follow me? So assume that your reports are being refreshed on a daily basis. So, this was sometime last week. Incrementally, a few more records came in early this week, so on and so forth. And this Canada, US, India, and China is the latest information that's been input, right? Further from here, it refreshes the Power BI. And if I were to go refresh the BI here, you will actually see that US, Canada, China, and India have actually been added, right? So this entire system has been refreshed hands off, right? Automatic. So let us actually unpack this step by step, right? The very first step, of course, is to have the Excel file ready from your system to be spit out over email as a template, right? So that's standardized with columns. So assume that that has been done, right? Then what you do is you go over to your Power Automate. So I'm going to edit this Power Automate flow, and the starting point here is the trigger here is when an email arrives, right? So this is an automated flow. So you would actually go create an automated cloud flow, right? It should run automatically. And if I get in, I'm going to edit this again. So when an email arrives, to your inbox, so, to Sanjiv, the from could be from the system, right? And then the subject filter here says sales data. That's up to you as to how you configure the email to be sent to you from, let us say, SAP, right? That's completely up to you. You define this. And then what happens is basically you get the attachment here, right? You get the attachment. So I've added a condition here saying that the attachment, basically the attachment name here, right? It says apply to each attachment name. So if I were to click here in dynamic data, if I were to say attachment, you will actually see attachment name to the step that says when an email arrives, right? So that's what I have here. And it contains sales in the name of the file, right? And that you define, right? You know the name of the file that the SAP generates as an output, right? So you basically say it contains the name. Why do you do this? Because you don't want to have to deal with looping of files downstream. You want to cache this up front so that you just get what you want, that one file, and then you further process it, right? So once this condition is actually met, right, when the attachment contains sales, if yes, you go fetch the attachment, right? So in order for you to get the attachment, you need the message ID, and you actually need the attachment ID as well, right? So if I were to say attachment here, you will actually see the attachment ID, and that's what's represented here. And the message ID is here as well. So if I say message, if I go up here, let me actually go up there to dynamic content, and then say message, and you see the unique identifier for the message here, right? So once we've got these two, you go ahead and basically create a file in a SharePoint site, on a SharePoint site, right? So I've got the site here, and then the folder path is incremental refresh, as you just saw earlier. So the basic library is documents, and inside of documents, I have a folder called incremental refresh. So I put the create the file there. So in order for me to create the file, basically from attachments, I get the name of the file, right? So if I were to go to dynamic content here, if I were to say name, you will see from the attachment, I get the name of the attachment. And then obviously you get the bits and bytes. So the content bytes are over here, and that is in get attachments as well, right? So I get the name and the content bytes, okay? And that creates the file in SharePoint. But the issue here is that in order for you to pick this, the data from the Excel here, in order for you to pick the data from here and then put it in a SharePoint list, the data inside the columns are the same as other, templates from before, but the columns essentially have to be, the data has to be made a table. Now, in order for you to make that into a table, you actually need to run an Office script inside of Excel. And that is exactly what this step is doing. It's basically running a script, right? And then it is picking up the, the references, the document library. Then you get the file ID from the create file here. So if I were to go say ID, it says basically the unique ID of the file or the folder in the create file step. So you've got that. And it goes away and runs an Office script here. Now, let us actually go look at that Office script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my OneDrive here, right there. And then I'm going to actually look for a file that has the script. So if I were to go to my files, and then if I were to go to, the base folder for Prudentia, right? This is literally the root folder. I mean, it could be anywhere. In this case, I have it here in the root folder. If I were to open this file, and then if I were to go to automate, you will actually see the option to create a new script, right? You can basically say create in code editor, and then the script shows up like so, right? And then if I've got one already, so if I were to say, click on this guy, maybe I could make it a little bigger, and like so. And if I were to edit this, let us actually walk through this, right? So first of all, the entry point here is this main function, right? And that's referring to the entire workbook, which is the Excel file. And then you are basically getting the first sheet here, right? And that's why it says get worksheet 0, right? That is basically the starting point, right? Your data is always in the first sheet, right? And then if not, you'll need to look for the specific sheet name and then pass it here, right? Then what happens is basically it goes away, and then in the let range here, it goes away and then finds cells that actually contain data. As an example, row 1 is empty, row 2 is empty, row 3 has got headers, row 4 through 10 is the data, so on and so forth, right? Then it goes in and basically says, let me go up here, get range values, right? It basically says, first of all, let's back up a little bit. If it basically says if the sheet is completely empty, is null, then don't do anything, right? Otherwise, it goes away and then it gets the actual values, right? Which is right here. Okay, it gets all the values and then converts, Excel data into a 2D array, right? Then it basically removes any empty rows at the top, right? It's basically, this is exactly what it's saying. Let start row equals 0. And this is kind of where it actually tracks where the real data actually starts, right? And then it's going to loop through, right? Checks each row here and moves until it finds non-empty data right there, right? Non-empty data. Then what it does is it goes away and then, it basically checks, right? It's essentially checking, is every cell in this row empty or not, right? And if its start row is empty, continue. If the start row 1 is empty, continue. Start row 2 is not empty, you stop, and that, start row equals 2 is your, entry point, right? Then it also says basically, if all rows are essentially empty, you exit the loop. But otherwise, it goes in and actually creates a trimmed range here. You see, it is actually creating a trimmed range, right? It starts at the first data row includes all other remaining rows and includes all the columns, right? Once that happens, right, once it creates a clean range, right, 0 is empty, row 1 is empty, row 2 is headers, row 3 is data, and then once it trims it, you just get row 2 as headers, row 3 as data, right? And these you can actually make sure they start from the very beginning without any empty rows as you export from SAP, right? And then what it does is it goes away and then creates the table here. You see, it has actually gone in and then created the entire table, right? Converts range into a table. True means first row is a header, then row 2 is a header, row 3 is data, so on and so forth, right? And it goes away and then sets the name of the table here to auto visualization, right? I mean, auto table, right? So essentially, from a visualization standpoint, it basically has gone in, checked for actual data, and then it starts the loop. It basically then, creates a table and names the table as auto table. So that's what the script actually does. And this is in my OneDrive root folder, right? So if I were to get back to the Power Automate flow here, so I essentially then get the script. I mean, if you were to do the drop down here, you will see all the Office scripts, and here's the new one. I actually select that, right? Once that is done, then I go in and then it basically now, the Excel basically has tables, right? So if I were to go to this file here that just got created, you will actually see that the data has been made into a table, right? Remember, when we first got the email, this wasn't in a tabular format, and it went ahead and actually created that particular table, right? So from there, we know that the Excel now it has tables, so you can actually list rows present in that table. So you basically go to the location, to documents, get the ID, and then you can go in and basically specify here that the table is an auto table, right? So you select the document library for the file. When you create file, it gives you the ID. Now remember that when you select the ID of the file from here, the table might not be visible when you do the drop down, right? So you might actually have to do the drop down here, select custom value, and enter the name of the table, which is what I've actually done. So with this, it actually lists the rows present in a table. And what that does is that if I were to go back here and literally go into a run, and look at the output of the, let me go to the next one, condition, and then there is my list rows. If I were to select this, or maybe I need to go to the first one because the very first one is what actually is relevant, right? If I go here to list rows in the table, you will actually see the outputs come out like so, right? This is the actual JSON here, right? So I could select this JSON here and then parse it, right? Which is what I've done in the flow, right? So I select that JSON and then I go into parse JSON here. And in parse JSON, I basically go in from list rows, select the body, and then I go to generate from sample and paste the body from a previous run, right? And when I do that, it auto-generates this array here, right? And so it parses each of the lines, so I will be able to select. So in apply to each, I create item, which is my Sharepoint list, which is right here. If I were to go to transaction sales, I have the title that stands for the country, I have product and sales. So once I got this, I go back into my flow here and I say create item, and then I indicate the list name, and then I pick up from the parse JSON step the country, the product, and the sales. These are the columns that the Excel has. So I will list those here, and then so this item is actually created, right? So once the item is created in Sharepoint, the rest is very simple. I just have a Power BI data set and a semantic model. I'm not going to go through creation of the semantic model here. That is really basic. So you just go to powerbi.com, and here you just go to powerbi.com. You go to your workspace that has capacity, new item, create a semantic model, and then connect it to SharePoint, right? So then essentially you can connect that to your flow right here because the connection to SharePoint exists, and then you can just refresh the data, right? So what happens is when you get an email with the template, it checks it once again for a condition where the attachment name has sales, and then if yes, it gets the attachment, creates the file. So the file is created in SharePoint, but it doesn't have a data. The data is not in tabular format. So it runs the script that converts the data into a table. Then you pick up the table, list the rows in the table, and then you parse JSON because it comes in as a JSON object. And then you apply to each and create the items that gets picked up in the list rows through the parse JSON, and then you refresh the data set. Okay, so that is in a nutshell, actually in a detailed view as to how you could automate the entire process of standardized templates from your SAP without any manual intervention, and bring it to your email and then refresh the Power BI. I trust this was useful. Hope to be doing many more videos in the future. Thank you very much.